Well, Kelsey, thanks so much for taking some time to hang with me today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks so much for having me on. I'm so pumped to be here and have this conversation.
Yeah. Well, it is obviously a very sensitive conversation, and I really appreciate your vulnerability of being willing to share it, not only with your audience, but also ours as well. But take me back to 2018, to the moment when you learned of your pregnancy. What was that moment like? Were you trying to get pregnant? Were you not? Like, did you already have kids? Take us through that moment.
Yeah, that's a great question and a great place to start, actually. We did have one kiddo already, a little girl, and we were enjoying her and trying to enjoy our time with her as much as possible before like saying, okay, are we really ready for two? Because we've heard that one is like none, two is like 10, So
How
we
old
were
was
like,
she at the time?
she was about two.
Cool.
Yeah, so we were very careful about waiting and deciding when we wanted to try, but we both had kids older, right? So we're both older, and we knew that kind of our window was closing. So when we decided was actually we took a trip to France. My husband and I did for about 2 weeks, and it was very terrifying for us to leave our child at home. But it was his very best friend who is going to get married out in France, and we were like, we have to do this. We only have one kid. She's very young. She probably won't remember. Like this may be kind of like a
This
final
won't scar
hurrah.
her.
Yeah, exactly. Like this is our chance. Like the window's closing. So we were like, okay, let's do it. And we had talked about starting to try like on that trip in France. Like this is going to be like our
Mhm.
big thing, like, okay, like we're doing a big trip, and we're going to start to try when we're out there. So it was very fun, right? Very adventurous and fun and exciting on paper, right? And we went and we started trying in France, and then we came back and we found out we were pregnant. And
And by the way, can I just say that, like, that whole metaphor of like we're trying, like we know what you're doing. Like that's just awkward. Okay, that's just awkward. Let's just be. I mean, just to be awkward here. Okay,
I know, right?
we're in
Like
France. We're trying. Like,
I know.
okay, awkward
Uh,
visuals.
yes, I know. It's amazing when you meet strangers and you have the conversation like, "Oh, are you trying to have kids?" It's like, I legit met you 20 minutes ago and you want to know about my intimate life." Okay, that's okay. I see where we're going. Like it's become normal almost.
Yeah, yeah. All right, so
So,
you get back to the States, you find out you're pregnant, and
yep.
you were excited then, I would assume.
Oh my gosh, over the moon. We felt so lucky to be able to get pregnant so quickly, because I think when you get older, especially when you start to have kids or try to have kids when you're older, you think I'm ready. Like I've waited. Like I sowed all my oats, I did all my things, and now that I'm ready to have kids,
Yeah, you're
like
really
I'm ready
old.
now.
I mean, you are old. What, like 28?
Well, I'm 36. I appreciate that though. 28 is
I'm
very
not
kind of
old,
you.
but
um, no, but you decide when you decide, like you're like I'm ready now, and you think that it's going to happen so quickly, and it
mhm,
often doesn't, right? Like I think
mhm,
that the average time is at least 6 months.
right.
And so we had kind of expected it to take a little while. So when we got pregnant right away, we just were elated, over
Mm,
the moon. Like we had no scares, we had no miscarriages before. Like
mhm,
we didn't expect anything bad to happen.
mhm,
We just it was the most exciting thing. We told people very early on because we were in France and everyone knew we were starting to try, and it was this big joke and it was so fun, and all our best friends were there. And so when we went to the first ultrasound, we were at about 6 weeks, and we got a picture of the baby, and it was a very strong heartbeat.
mm,
And so we sent it out to all of our friends because we were like, well, we heard the heartbeat and
mhm,
we saw the baby, and everything seems really positive. And we never even thought to be conscious or careful of it.
mm.
And we sent out this picture just to the friends that we went to France with, and we're like, look what we have, a French baby. Like this is so exciting. We had such a fun like laugh at it. So yeah, so we were over the moon.
Mm. And so at what point did things you that was at 6 weeks, things were fine. At what point did things seem like, okay, things are not going as planned?
Yeah, so that was at about 6 weeks, and we didn't get in for another appointment till about a little after 10 weeks, almost 11 weeks. And when we went into that 11-week appointment, we brought my little girl, my little 2-year-old, and my husband and I were there. And the doctor took a look, and she immediately was like, let me just like listen for the heartbeat. And immediately was like, I, I need to do an ultrasound.
Mm.
And I think my husband at that point said that he immediately was like, oh my gosh,
So
like,
she was just using a stethoscope at that point,
yes, yeah.
right?
She was using like a little Doppler,
Oh,
like,
oh, okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so she was using a little Doppler trying to find the heartbeat. And she was like, like maybe the baby's hiding, or, maybe it's, like you're really small. Maybe the baby's really small. I don't, like, oh, let me just do a ultrasound instead.
Hmm.
So she pulls the ultrasound machine in, and she does ultrasound, and then she just kind of stops and
Mm.
says, this is not looking the way I want it to look.
Mm.
And I immediately knew. My husband, I think he knew probably 10 minutes before that, when she
Mm.
couldn't find it, the heartbeat. And I my sister and a lot of other friends of mine have gone through miscarriages. So it
Mm.
wasn't an absolute shock, as in, oh my gosh, this could never happen.
Hmm.
But I think that you just never think it can happen to you.
Right.
Like we have this idea that that these things happen to other people, or it's,
Mm.
the exception, when like the statistics are pretty high. There's a significant chance it could happen to you. And
Right.
we just never went down that route. So we really didn't prepare that much for that. So when she had said that, I was about 11 weeks. And, like you're almost at that 12-week mark, which is like, you're in the safe zone at
Right.
12 weeks. And what she had said was actually that the baby probably had stopped growing at about 7 weeks. So
Mm.
that was really hard for me to hear, that I had that baby inside me for the
Hmm.
last 3-4 weeks.
Right.
And I was also very sick. That was also like the worst part about it, is I was throwing up every single day. I was incredibly sick, and I was growing. My belly was growing because it was my
Mm.
second pregnancy, right? So it's like your belly pops a lot faster.
Hmm.
So I was having all the normal pregnancy symptoms, and everyone always says, "Oh, you're sick. That's such a good sign,"
Mm.
where apparently it wasn't a good sign for me. Apparently my body thought I was pregnant, so
Hmm.
it was reacting as if I was pregnant. So I was getting all the really crappy symptoms of being pregnant,
Yeah.
while then finding out that actually for the last 4 weeks you haven't been pregnant. So that was a big shock to my system. It was like, oh wow, like I almost feel kind of like tricked. Like
Mm.
I thought that this was going on in my body, and actually this has been going on. This stopped happening like a while ago. So
Wow. One of the things you just said was that miscarriages are so common. And I think, it's the statistics are so, I guess, out there a little bit, because I've read 10 to 20%. Some people think it's even higher, because women perhaps don't even realize that they're pregnant and something passes. So I know for my wife and I, when we miscarried the first time, we were very young. We were probably mid 20s. And we had already had our daughter. And so it was our second pregnancy. And we had not been around a lot of people that had miscarried.
mhm.
And, for us, it was, wow, does this happen to a lot of people? And then all of a sudden people start popping up going, oh yeah, that happened to me. Or, oh yeah, that happened to me. And did you find that obviously you were a little bit older, but that people started saying, oh yeah, that happened to me, that you didn't even realize that they had had a miscarriage? Or were people more open with you about it?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I don't think it's easy for people to be open about it.
Hmm.
It really can be a devastating experience, and it's a loss, and so it's something that people have to grieve. And then when they finally move on from the grief, they have to give themselves time to then be able to speak about it. So
Hmm.
often when you're hearing about people's miscarriages, it's much later, after they've gone through them and they've had time to process them, and they're comfortable speaking about it. And even at that point, it's not something where you want to raise your hand and be like, hey, this is dinner table,
Right.
conversation. So I didn't know a ton of people, but I think because I was a little bit older, My sister had gone through one, and she was very private about that as well. I probably only knew about it because I was her sister.
Mm-hmm.
And a few of my best friends had gone through them, so they had confided in me, and their best friends of best friends, because we were all kind of in our mid 30s, had
Mm-hmm.
experienced them as well. So I was lucky in the fact that I'm I'm by nature an oversharer and very transparent, and I think I'm very vulnerable, and I think that breeds vulnerability, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So when I get vulnerable about whatever it is that's going on in my life, like my relationship with my husband, or some hard moments I'm having with work, or whatever it is, when I get really honest, I think people feel the safety of being
Mm-hmm.
honest as well. And so I think that I can kind of facilitate those conversations to go a little bit deeper. So maybe because of my personality, I felt like I had a couple more people come out. But once I went through the miscarriage and I was very vocal about my miscarriage, oh my gosh, the amount of people that have come to me and told me that they've gone through that, or that they're going through it in that very moment. I've had
Mm.
so many people, like, I will literally get daily emails or daily DMs from people being like, I am in the middle of this right now. Like, thank you so much for sharing your story, or, just thank you for opening the conversation. And I think that it's a tricky one, because while I do want there to be a lot of openness about it, and I do want people to be able to talk about it, I also want people to know that you don't have to, like, it is a grieving process. And if you're not comfortable talking about it right away, like, don't feel like you have a duty to speak about it, but know that there are so many other people going through that, and the community that you can feel, and the connectiveness that you may need during that time is
Mm-hmm.
100% available.
Mm-hmm. The whole pregnancy conversation is so sticky. It's everything from,
Yeah.
okay, don't ask if somebody's pregnant, right? And then, like my wife and I, we tried for a couple years before we got pregnant, and every baby shower was just a tear fest for her. It was just
Mm.
so brutal. And so you want to celebrate, but then at the same time, you're sensitive to those who can't get pregnant. And then, sometimes then when you are pregnant, some people want to share every possible problem that they have experienced. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Every single person that they know that has had a miscarriage, and then you're at home freaking out, going, "Oh my gosh." It's a
Mhm.
sticky thing. But
It's so tricky.
yeah, but I think that the vulnerability is so powerful, like you said. So you're in that doctor's office, you've been given this information. What's next for you? Like, what's going through your head? Did they offer options at that point? Take me through the next
Yeah.
steps.
Well, that's the crazy thing about, so we had been through one pregnancy, and so we kind of assumed we knew the ropes, like we knew what we were doing. Like, definitely your first pregnancy and your first kid, like, you have no idea what's going on. Everything's very exciting. Like, every week like, you're like, what's happening in my body this week? It's so, like,
Yeah.
and you learn a lot, like, because you're very absorbent and you don't know anything. It's brand new. And so when we got pregnant with the second, for us, it was kind of like, okay, like, we know what's going on here. Like, we don't have to prepare for these doctor's appointments. We're just going to show up. And we did. And what I didn't realize was, like, miscarriages are not black and white. Like, they are not like, oh, you've just miscarried, here's what we do next. There are
Hmm.
so many different options of what you can do next. And so many different things happening inside your body, and based off what week it is, or like, what's going on with the baby, or what's going on with the sac, and like everything, that they give you so many options. And what's crazy is, you just heard that this baby inside of you is no longer viable, and then they're giving you three or four option as to what to do next. You're just like, I can't even hear you right
Head is
now.
just
Like,
spinning.
yeah, like, I can't take in any information. And we loved our doctor. We still do. So we were very lucky in the fact that we felt very connected to her, which I think is kind of a rarity sometimes. Not everyone feels that close with their doctor. So to have
Hmm.
someone not only deliver such devastating news, but then also say, hey, here are your options, and we got to make a decision fast. Like,
Mm.
you're closing in on a window where you're going to lose some of these options soon. So, like, think about it, but call me at the end
Hmm.
of the day. I'm like, I need to be able to breathe first. Like,
Hmm.
hold on, I've got my 2-year-old sitting here next to me who's been like kissing my belly, my growing belly for the last 3 weeks and saying goodnight to the baby every time I put her down to sleep. Like, I don't even know where to go. And now I have to think about how you're going to physically remove this from my body. Like, it was really intense. And also, I'm a highly emotional person and highly sensitive, but I'm also very pragmatic. So both of those, I think, they weren't reconciling, right? They were both fighting to be heard.
Hmm.
So part of me was trying to allow the emotions to happen, and the other part of me was trying to allow my logical brain to kick in and say, "You have to make a decision." And I think I went into very much a mama bear mode in that moment, and was like, I need to decide what to do for my next baby. Like, I decided right then and there that we were moving on, and we're so lucky we got pregnant. We're so lucky we have one child. The idea of getting pregnant is something that I don't feel like I have to be so nervous about, and that alone is a blessing. Like, I feel like I've seen so many people struggle to get pregnant, so the fact
Right.
that we were able to do it so quickly and we already had a kid, that was what I was choosing to focus on. And so I was like, if I focus there, my next place to focus on is that I need to take care of my body for the next pregnancy,
Mm.
because we're going to try again. Like, we definitely want more than one kid. Like, so I don't know when we're going to try, and I don't know when I will be emotionally ready to try, but when we do, I need to have my body prepared for that. So then I just instantly went into what is the best route to
Okay.
like take the best care of my body.
Okay. And it sounds like they offered you several options. Would you mind just briefly, you don't have to get into all the medical details, but just
Yeah.
the three options that you were given for someone who's listening that perhaps hasn't gone through this so that, they're informed.
Yeah, of course. So I was given the option of letting it pass naturally, right? Which is just basically like your body will quote unquote expel it. We don't know when, we don't know how, like,
And that could take
but
like even like weeks then.
oh yeah, absolutely. And I had this in my body for the last 4 weeks, and it hadn't kind of expelled it yet. So they were like, you can wait and we'll just keep checking in weekly to see if it does it naturally. Which I was like, well, can I get some more information around that? Like, what does that feel like? What does that look like? But they had not a ton of information, right? And I didn't have the wherewithal to ask all of those questions, or nor did I really want to hear the details at
Hmm.
that moment, But that was the first option. The second option was almost to like induce that kind of labor. So when you kind of get to that 11-12 week mark, the sac that was around the baby and the place that the baby had grown was fairly large, and so your body was going to have to almost go through a little bit of labor to expel it. And um, so the option was to either let it allow your body to do that naturally, which I think of course all of us want to do, right? Like, someone says you can do something like naturally, like, yes, we're going to want to opt for that. The next option though was to induce it. So to give, to take some pills, or to insert some things into your body that would help you to speed up the process.
Okay.
But it would still be kind of passing it naturally. It basically just be like if you were to induce labor.
Hmm.
Um, and then the third option was a DNC, and that window was closing for me. But the DNC would be to go in and to surgically kind of just go in and remove it. And she's like, for lack of a better term, you kind of go in and with a tool and kind of just
Hmm.
pull everything out. So
Hmm.
you would go under. It's like a 15-minute process. And she was like, go home and think about which
Hmm.
one you would want to which route you would want to take.
And DNC, do you remember what that stands for?
um I will butcher it if I say
I'm going to look it
it.
up. I'm going to look it
Yeah.
up right here because my
Yeah.
wife has had three of them. Um, Dilation and oh, curettage,
Yeah.
Curettage.
Yeah.
So
I
it's
remember.
basically just to remove tissue from the inside the uterus is the definition. So
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
DNC. Yeah.
Yeah. And And so when presented with these, they're very different options. Like one's a
Right.
surgical option, one is naturally to let it
Right.
pass. The doctors have no information as to which one really is better for you.
Mm.
So, what was so interesting was because I was almost hitting that 12-week mark, she was kind of looking at me being like, does one of these sound better than the other? And I'm like, I'm so sorry. I can't answer that for you right now.
Mhm.
Like, how much time do I have? Because I don't know anything about these options that you've given me, like at all. Like, I don't know what a DNC really entails. Like, we had a C-section with McKenna, our first, and before going down that route, like, you have plenty of time to research it. Like, you have plenty of time to understand what you're getting into, what that's going to look like, what the recovery is, like what the risks are. And I think it's a lot easier to make those decisions when you're well informed. So not only are you like having an emotional spike and a loss, but you're also then trying to comprehend all of these options.
So ultimately, how did you make that decision?
Well, we left the office, and she had said, get back to me as soon as you can. If you're going to go the DNC route, we're going to get you in as soon as possible. Um, if you're going to go the other routes, like, I just want to be in contact with you and monitor it, and just because you're so kind of late in the process. So we left, and I remember just sitting outside of the doctor's office with my husband, and my daughter has no idea what's going on.
Mm.
And I am just sitting there with kind of like tears streaming down my face, and I wasn't hysterical. I wasn't as hysterical as I would have thought I would have been, right? I definitely felt like I needed to be strong, and make a decision moving forward for us. Not out of like a puff up my chest, be strong, but as in, you're going to crash. Like, you will cry. You're going to grieve this for a long time. It's not just today.
Mhm.
It's going to be a process. Like, if you can, hold it together to make the best decision for your body and your family and for your next child, like, that's your best option just for now. So we sat outside the doctor's office, and I remember McKenna was running around, and I was just sitting on the bench, and Colin, my husband, was just trying to occupy her and was like, what do you want to do? Like, do you need to, should we get food? Like, should we go get dinner? Like, should we go home and cry? What do you want to do? And I was like, yeah, let's pick up some food and go home. And we went home, and just an absolute shock, put her down for bed, and we started talking about it and researching the options. And I started to text a couple friends, and that's one of the hardest that was one of the hardest parts for me about the miscarriage, was telling other people, because it breaks other people's hearts.
Mm.
No one wants to hear that, and it breaks their heart for you. Like, so their response back, I almost felt like I had to nurture them, and I had to be like, it's okay. We're all right. We're really positive, and we're very grateful we got pregnant, and we know we'll get pregnant again, but I almost felt like I had to put so much energy into making sure that they were okay, that I
Mhm.
was like, oh, for a while there, I didn't want to talk about it, because I just didn't want to have to tell other people and see the look on their face and break their hearts. Which is, a very natural thing, I think, for people. Like, they love you, they
Right.
don't want to see you in pain. But I texted a couple people to get some information, like, hey, I know you went through this, or maybe a friend went through this. And so some information started trickling in. And I will tell you, the decisions I made every single decision. I decided at first, we're going to pass it naturally. That's it. And then I started to read up on, like, what would happen if it didn't pass naturally, and how long it could just be inside my body. And then the process, if you missed the DNC cutoff time and it hadn't passed by then. And so the more I talked to people, they were like, you don't want to wait. Like, you could be waiting a really, really, really long time. And the longer you wait, the longer you can't start trying for your next pregnancy.
Okay.
So then we decided we were going to put the prescription in, and we were going to help induce it. Right. So we call and we say, that's what we're going to decide. And she's like, okay, great. And then I start hearing stories about what that's like. And people just start talking about how that is like the most painful, horrific experience they've
Mm.
ever had. And like, if you ever have the option between that and a DNC, like, absolutely do the DNC. And I think this was like over Labor Day. The prescription was in, I had it. I decided not to take it, and it was like a Friday. And I was like, okay, we're just going to do the DNC. And my sweet mom, was just like, just do the DNC, like, just take care of it. Like, I want you to be able to move on. I want, like, she was just like, don't prolong this. Don't go through that pain if you don't have
Mm-hmm.
to. So I was kind of reluctant to do the DNC because I had had a C-section. So there was already scar tissue in my body. And I knew that it was just going to create more scar tissue. So I was trying to avoid it if possible. And then just the more and more information I collected, the more I heard, honestly, the DNC is so safe and it's so minimally invasive, and they can do it in a way that just makes this grieving process a little bit easier. Like, it's done, you can move on, which all still sounds horrible, right? Like, but so I'm desperately now on Friday trying to call my OB's surgery scheduler and get in as soon as possible, like for the next Tuesday or whatever it is, to get on her schedule for a DNC. And I couldn't get a hold of her. She had left for the weekend because it was like, Labor Day weekend or something. And she had left and she was on vacation, and her surgery scheduler was leaving, but she was still in the building. So I was like trying to track her down, and like all of a sudden felt this panic. Like, I have to get on the schedule. I have to get on the schedule. It was almost like I just needed that kind of closure. I
Right.
needed to know what was going to happen. And so I finally get a message in, and they're basically like, listen, we can't put you on the schedule without the doctor's approval. We can't get a hold of the doctor, but this is a priority. Like, we're going to call you first thing Tuesday. Like, we're not going to leave you hanging. Like,
Mm-hmm.
trust me, like,
Mm-hmm.
be prepared to come in Tuesday. We can help you out. And I was like, okay, all right. And so what was interesting was that weekend we were planning to go up and see my husband's family up in the Bay Area, and we left and we flew up there, and the second we landed, my body started to pass yeah,
Wow.
I started to bleed, and I was like, wouldn't that of course just happen? Like, you spend so much time trying to organize and project manage like your life and your body in a pregnancy, and your body's like, hey, I'm gonna do my thing. You can
Mm.
project manage all you want, but like, this is out of your control. And so that started to happen. So I started to actually pass and go through the miscarriage process before that DNC ever could potentially happen on Tuesday. So that all happened for me like Friday night.
Mm. And you ended up having the DNC on Tuesday, is that correct?
Well, I actually ended up lightly and heavily bleeding throughout the weekend, and then on Monday actually we flew back, um, and I that Monday I actually started to pass it more naturally, and I went through heavy like labor contractions, and I actually ended up in the ER late Monday night. Because my cervix had, I guess it was so swollen and my body was trying to pass everything, it couldn't. So I went in, and I mean, this is very graphic. So I will not go into too many details, but I did end up going into the ER, and at like midnight on Monday, they went in and they like manually went in and removed it. So I didn't actually go through the DNC. I didn't go
Gotcha.
through an actual surgery, but an OB had to come in and go in and help remove everything. And then I went in the next morning to, they called me, my doctor called me right away on Tuesday morning and was like, I heard you want to get in for the DNC. I'm seeing ER reports last night. Like, come in. Let's take a look and see what's going on. If we need to, we'll perform the DNC. And I came in, and everything was gone. And she did the ultrasound, and it was complete. Like, there was nothing up on the ultrasound. And the ER experience was kind of traumatic for me because I hadn't gone through labor contractions with McKenna. It was a scheduled C-section. So I didn't know how intense labor
Wow.
contractions were. Like, I did feel like when I went through the C-section with McKenna, I kind of like missed out on a rite of passage. And I feel like I got that now. And I have so much love and respect for people that go through intense contractions, because it was literally to the point where I was in the back seat of the car with my husband driving to the ER, where I was just hysterical and like, oh my gosh, like this is straight out of the movies. Like you can't move. It's so intense. The contractions of your whole body, like you can't breathe. They're so intense. And so it was a little bit of a traumatic experience, like going to the ER and having everything happen. And so when I like slept that night, I didn't realize that that was it, like that was the end of that process, and now it was time to move on in like this grieving process. And so when I went to the doctor the next day and they did the ultrasound and they were like, nope, you're good to go, you don't need the DNC, it was almost like disappointing to me. I was almost like, oh wow, like, and that's when I really started to grieve. That's when I really
Mm,
was like, oh, there's nothing inside of my body anymore. Like that is over. Like you actually have to move on now. And that's when that's when I called up my counselor, and my husband and I called up our counselor. We're like, this is going to be sad. We feel it now. Like we feel the
mm,
weight of it. And this is going to be a sad process. And so that's when we started the grieving process. And I still definitely chose to look at it from the point of view of, I'm so grateful I have this little 2-year-old running around me. Like I couldn't
mhm,
be more grateful in that moment for McKenna. Like just seeing her was like, if nothing else happened in the world, if we could never get pregnant again, I'm so lucky that I have her. Like,
mhm,
and I'm so lucky to go through a miscarriage process with a child, like that. I feel like I'm very, very blessed and lucky. I'm very lucky that we got pregnant so quickly. So I had to focus there. It was a choice. Like I knew every day getting up the next few days was like, you get to choose what you focus on. It
mm,
doesn't mean you ignore the sadness. It doesn't mean you power through the sadness. Like I still definitely, we would sit on the couch and cry every night, probably for like 30 minutes. And then we would move on. We'd be like, this is horrible. Like this is so sad. And then we would focus on her, and we would focus on us, and we would focus on our time together, and he would pour me a glass of wine, and we'd be like, we can do this, like we have each
mm,
other and so many like great things. But it was a process.
mhm, for sure. Um, when we had our second miscarriage, I was actually in the Grand Canyon with a friend, and
Mm.
my wife was with our daughter, who was several years old, in Santa Barbara with visiting a friend. And I got a call at like around midnight or something like that, maybe 2 in the morning. And it was from my wife's friend saying, she's having a miscarriage. You need to
Oh,
come right away. So I'm in the Grand Canyon. She's in Santa Barbara. I have a friend who lives in Costa Mesa, Orange County. If you're not familiar with the geography, listeners, those are not close together. So we
yeah.
literally drove through the night back to Costa Mesa, and I dropped him off. And then I drove straight to Santa Barbara to be with my wife. My wife was 16 weeks
Oh,
at that time, and she, like you, I don't remember if I assume they induced her, and she had to, deliver
hmm,
the child. And so I think the thing that is so confounding in a lot of ways is the ways that the husband or partner deals with the situation versus the woman. And I think in when you're in that situation, there's a tendency maybe to feel like, well, how should I feel? I should be feeling this. I should be, like, how did your husband, just in it, right, it's just one experience, right, it's not the right
right.
way, it's just like, how did you guys, how did he feel? Did he feel it? Was he more just there with you but he didn't feel it necessarily? Like, how did he walk through that process with you?
Yeah, you know what? That's such a good question. And it was such an interesting experience for my husband and I, because my husband and I tend to be on the same page with a lot of things. Like we enjoy life in the same ways. We have very similar humor. We find the same adventures fun. We both are on a fantasy football team together. We do a lot of similar things. Like we follow a similar path, and we react to things very similarly. And I think this was the first time in our relationship where we reacted so differently and we had such different experiences.
Huh.
And I wasn't expecting that at all. I just expected, as normal, like we would have the same, we kind of bounce off each other, be slightly different, from a male and a female perspective. But for the most part, we would go through the similar, you know,
Hmm.
process. And we didn't at all. And, um, it was harder for both of us in different ways, but I think that I was maybe a little bit more prepared for it because as a woman who wants to get pregnant, like I'm thinking about that all the time. I'm doing tons of research on it. I'm talking to my girlfriends about it 24/7, right? Like it's very front in my face. Like I know every month we don't get pregnant, like I know the statistics of what's happening, like I'm calling up my OB and asking her, and so those things just were very front of mind for me. And I also am a little bit more of an oversharer than my husband. I connect with people by sharing, and by talking about things. And while he's highly emotional intelligent, he is such a high emotional intelligence, and he is a fantastic communicator. He also he does like a level of privacy, and as we went through this, because the grief I think was a little bit harder for him at the time, it was a little bit more unexpected. um, and and people do say this sometimes when you have a child, and this is your next you miscarry after you have a child, that miscarriage feels very much like your second child. Like it is not just a baby or a
Hmm.
fetus or a 12-week. It is a child. Like you've already envisioned what life is going to be like with your second child. And I probably didn't let my brain go that far. Like I just probably in self-preservation mode hadn't quite gone that far, and I think he probably had gone a little bit further than I had.
Hmm.
So the grieving and the devastation I think for us was different levels, and the way that we were working through it was very different. So when I would talk about it, he was like, I want you to do what you need to do. Like, I want you to talk about this if it's helpful, but I don't really want to talk about it, which for me was shocking because he's so communicative. Like, we
Mm.
talk about everything together. Like, I'm very lucky in the fact that I have a husband that will talk that much with me about things. And he was like, I want to go through this process in a healthy way. And we were like, we'll go to some therapy sessions and make sure we're creating space for each other and staying close and connective and supportive during this. But he's like, I don't want to talk about it in the way that you are talking about it. And I was like, I'm so glad you're telling me that, because I would never have guessed that. Like, we'd be talking about this every night. Like, if I didn't know that from you, like, I would, because he's so supportive. So when
Sure.
I would cry or I would tear up, he would be like, how are you feeling? Do you want to talk? What do you want? What do you need? And he's
Hmm.
very selfless like that. So he'd say, what do you need? When the whole time I didn't know in the beginning that really what he needed was just a little bit of space from it.
Mm.
He needed a little bit of space to kind of grieve and to move on a little bit from it. And that grieving and that space and that moving on, he was just doing it in a bit of a different way than I was. So I just thought that was so interesting. I never would have expected that. And it's hard to know how two people are going to grieve when
Hmm.
you've never gone through a loss like that before.
Right. That is so good. Yeah, that's so powerful to just be able to talk with each other about what is going on, what each other needs, not assume that, a certain way. Um, I know for me, I actually probably had, I don't want to say opposite, just different, in that I was so concerned about my wife. And, once again, like, how are you doing? She was feeling all of this, huge amounts of loss. And I wasn't feeling that much,
Right.
and I think that may be more common for guys,
Yeah.
to not feel as much because I wasn't carrying the child. I wasn't feeling the things, but I was just so concerned about her, and so my feelings were less about the loss of the child and more about like her, and like, how are you doing? Or how are you, getting through this process? But it's just the thing, no matter what, is husbands, partners need to be supportive, like however that looks like, whatever that,
Right.
that's obviously the point. So I'm glad you guys were able to process that and figure that out. Um,
Yeah.
for men and women who haven't gone through the process, what would you encourage them to say and not to say, or to do and not to do? Because that's, I think so many people are just like, I don't even know what to say. I'm
Right.
sorry. I'm sorry.
Right.
Like, what would you suggest?
Yeah. Oh man. There are no, I feel like I'm definitely not an expert in this in there. Please don't take my advice and run with it.
Maybe,
Feel
maybe what you didn't want people to say to you, or maybe what
Yeah,
you
yeah.
did want people to say to you is, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think, what's so interesting about again, like you don't know how people are grieving, right? Like people, especially like if you would have looked at my husband and I, right, I think that you probably would have assumed the opposite. Like you would assumed because I was so connective and caring of the child. Like right now I am 7 months pregnant and I have a baby in my belly right now.
Mm,
And we like when I feel the baby kick, um, I feel very connected to the baby. And I think that I may, at this point in the pregnancy, I probably let myself feel more connected to the baby than my husband does, right? Because now I've been
what's
carrying it
crazy?
for a
I'm
long
going to tell
time.
you a crazy thing. I'm
What?
looking at you earlier, and I said to myself, I go, I think she's pregnant.
Really?
Oh yeah, like I just said it in my, like, just, I don't know. I was just looking at you, and I'm like, I don't. Maybe she's not. I don't know. I just had this sense. Yeah, that's so funny. Wow, good for you. Congratulations.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, yes. Thank you. Yeah, we waited a while. We had to wait a while
Mhm.
to start trying again. I definitely wasn't mentally there. But yeah, when we did, we were very lucky to get pregnant
Mhm.
pretty quickly and
Did you go back to Paris?
we didn't. No.
Okay. All right.
Wah
No
wah.
French baby.
Definitely not as fun of a story. Um no, but we waited almost a whole year. Like so we waited a whole year to start trying again. But I feel more connected to the baby, I think, than my husband probably does right now, because I'm feeling the baby kick on a daily basis.
Right.
Like I'm talking to the baby, like it's like I feel so connected. So in theory, you would have thought the way that our grief process would have gone is I would have felt more connected to the baby. And I don't know what it was, and it may be our personalities, and it may just have been situational. But I also think that sometimes with parenting, at least what I've noticed is, and I just thought of this as you were explaining your situation and what you went through, is I do notice sometimes as parents, and in relationships, like sometimes when someone is like overly caring or overly involved or overly concerned, it almost gives the other parent like an out to kind of like relax a little bit. If
Mm,
someone's doing the sleep training, it's like, I know you're going to handle most of this. Like, I know I don't have to like be as on top of it because you've got this,
mhm,
and vice versa. And I think men and women tend to gradually, choose things that they're going to be a little bit more on top of, or just they care about a little bit more as a parent, which kind of gives the other parent like the option to relax a little bit. Like, oh, I know that dad is going to be all over the soccer games, right? Like, or I know mom is always going to make sure the lunches are ready, like, so I think as parents, we naturally like kind of overcompensate in certain areas. And I always wonder if maybe because I stepped straight into that kind of like mama bear role, like I can't
mhm,
focus on being too upset and devastated about this. Like I'm going to focus on moving forward, what this means for my body for the next pregnancy. I wonder if that almost gave him more room to take on the sadness for our
mhm,
child, So,
mm,
but so you just don't know how people are going to grieve. So
right.
how to respond to someone where you don't really know the inner workings of their grief is really, really, really tricky. But I will say, I have a really good friend, Emily McDowell, and she writes empathy cards. And I love talking to her about grief and empathy because I very much agree with what she says. And she has these cards that I think just describe exactly how you should respond to someone so perfectly. And they're basically like, there is no normal after this, right? Like, there's no
Mm,
way forward that I can help you with. But I will be there and I will be there with snacks.
mm,
Like, it's very much like, this is sucky, and like I'm not going to try to give you advice through this, like, but I am here for you 110%, whether you want to go and get a drink, or whether you want to cry and watch a movie, or whether you know, like whatever you want to do, I am
Hmm.
here for you. And I think that whether it's a miscarriage, it's whether someone's going through recovery, like these really intense things that are really hard to go through that you don't know how to respond to. Um, just letting someone know that you're there and not trying to problem solve for them, not trying to have pity for them, you know, like just showing up and being like, I'm here for you. I've got
Hmm.
your back. And I know that it's not gonna be the same moving forward. I
Hmm.
know that it's going to be different. I don't know if it will be horrible. I don't know if it just will be crappy. I don't know if it's going to be quick or long, but I'm here. I'm here for the
Hmm.
ride, and I'm here for whatever you need. And showing up in that way for me, when people showed up for me like that, was the best thing like possible. And I have learned to show up for people in that way since that experience, you know?
Hmm. I think the main thing that you're alluding to is that unsolicited advice is not real helpful.
Yeah.
Um, just so
Yeah.
so many things that people, want to say in terms of advice that can really, in a positive intent, can end up being real hurtful.
Yeah, yeah, and I don't think anyone ever tries to be hurtful. I
Nope.
think that I think in life in general, we probably over advise people, you know, when they, you know, they're like, oh yeah, I hate my job. It's like, well, have you tried this? Well, have you tried this? Well, have you, it's like, I actually just wanted to vent for a second, you know, like, you know, or there's so many funny memes out there about moms who, you know, like are like, oh gosh, my kid wouldn't sleep through the night. I'm so tired. And they're like, well, did you try this? Did you try that? And it's like, I just wanted to complain for a second, you know?
Right, right.
So I think you have to know the person. You have to be willing to approach it with like, oh man, that sucks. How are you feeling? Like, yeah, like, really, I mean, I'm a big believer in question-based conversation, you know, so because it creates a space for people to guide you and lead you to where they really want. Because if you're like, oh yeah, like that sucks. How are you feeling about that? You know, and they're like, it's driving me crazy. Do you have any thoughts? You know, and it's like, okay, there you go. Like
Hmm.
now
Right.
go for it and give your advice. Or like, it's driving me crazy and I just really need a coffee. It's like, cool, let's go get a coffee then. You know, like
Hmm.
you can really, I think, create that space for someone to come to you with what they need. But if you can't get there, if you naturally want to go into advice, like I would say, like, take a step back, like just think about creating a container of space for people and letting them know, like, I am here for you 110%, whichever way this coin falls, like whatever you need, like I am here. Like that, I don't think anything else could be more valuable than saying that,
Hmm.
you know?
I know you said, the one thing that you did not want was flowers. Why
Oh
is
my
this? What's wrong
gosh.
with? I love flowers.
Oh my gosh. My husband and I, we crack up about this now, but at the time, because no one knows what to do and you have such loving support, right? But then they send you flowers and you have these beautiful flowers like sitting on your counter and you're like, cool, those are my miscarriage flowers. Like, it's just like a constant reminder, like that these beautiful flowers are going to like remind you of the sympathy of your miscarriage, where you're like, I don't really want to think that. Like one of my very best friends sent me one with like a mug. It was like a mug with flowers in it. And so we like eventually threw away many of the flowers right away. And then we were like, well, we have this mug. Should we save the mug? He's like, are you going to drink coffee out of your miscarriage mug?
No,
Like,
no.
we're going to toss that. So it's like so good intentioned. And I can laugh with all of my friends about it because they love me so much. They had no idea what to do, right? They're at a loss. And I probably would have done the same thing. Like, but I'm like, maybe you could send food, you know, like maybe you could send, I mean, wine is a little tricky because it's like, I don't, some people are like, well, you can drink now. And it's like, no, 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 no. We're not there yet. I can't like wait till I celebrate the fact that I can drink and I
Yeah.
can get to that place. So, you know, like a card, like I love Emily's empathy cards, like just a card, just being like, this sucks, I am here, like let's go to a movie, or a text, or
Hmm.
something thoughtful that's showing up for them in a really meaningful way. But yeah, I would avoid the flowers.
Well, I do want to point people to, and I'll link in the show notes to the episode where you really went into detail in terms of the medical process that you went through the
Hmm.
miscarriage. And that is definitely I don't know about a trigger warning. It's a queasy warning for sure. You definitely
There's
went
a
into
lot of details in there.
a lot
There's a
of
lot of
details.
details.
Yes.
It's very
And
informational.
it's very informational. And I want to make sure that people have access to that. So we'll link to that in the show notes. But as I mentioned in the intro, you are a career strategist, you're a coach, and you obviously have your own podcast, which we will, point people to that, the Whiskey and Work podcast. But I also want to make sure that people have access to a planning tool, and I've downloaded it. It's great. It's very detailed. Tell us about this free planner. It's a business planner. Why would it be helpful for someone?
Yeah, yeah. So it's funny with the miscarriage and with learning how to be a wife and learning how to be a mom and learning what I want my life to really look like in adulthood as we as we start to move forward. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what that meant for me with work. I wanted to create a lifestyle where I could really be home with my kid and I could show up at her field trips whenever they, were available. And I was the mom that could take her to school and pick her up and then also have time for myself to be there for my husband and to cook him dinner and to iron his clothes and to do all these things that I had always envisioned I wanted to do. But as I got older, I also realized I really like my career. And I really love working and I love having that thing for myself and not just any career or hobby on the side. Like I wanted a successful career where I was bringing in a solid amount of finances and I felt really proud of it. And it was a thing where if I wanted to, I could go fly and go to a girls weekend away and have a glass of champagne and feel really good about this kind of multifaceted life that I wanted. And I had always heard that really you can only have one or the other, right? You could be a stay-at-home mom or you could have a really successful career. And I just never really bought into that. And so I started doing a lot of research and trying to figure out what I wanted to do for my own business, which is when I stumbled upon coaching and got into life coaching and business coaching and helped people kind of with career transition coaching. And then I built this business where I was able to do that, where I was able to work my, 20 hours a week and still be there for my kid and only work Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and have this epic business. And I wanted people to see that it was possible, and that they could do that. And I started to get so many questions about it. Like, how did you do that? Like, I don't need to make $1 million, but I would like to make multiple like six figures. Like I would, like that people are talking about, I want to leave these really impressive corporate jobs to be home with my kids, but I still want to do something that I feel really proud of. And so I started just talking to people about how I plan my business and how I plan my life. And it really kind of goes back to like the exact way that I managed my way through the miscarriage is I really choose what I want to focus on. And I'm really intentional and conscious about simplifying that so that I can move the needle and really give that the time and the dedication it deserves so that I don't feel like I'm missing out on it. I don't feel like it's getting wasted away in the distractions of life. It's not just this kind of muddled idea. It's a very focused idea. It's very thoughtful and it's rooted in the things that I actually care about. So I plan my business that exact same way. And it's a very holistic approach. Like I definitely start backwards. I start from like the lifestyle I want and I create my business model around that lifestyle. And then, yeah, I plug it into a 12-month planner. And then I get really conscious about how that shows up in on my weekly iCals and how I make time and create space for that. So yeah, I created the kind of like, I started talking to people about how I did that and they were asking so many questions that I created this very specific guide of this is how I do it. This is the process that you can follow to get really, really focused, know exactly what you want to like lean into so that you can see that needle really move and not in like 100 hours a week. You can see that needle move so that you can create that lifestyle that still allows you that freedom with your kiddos or future kiddos or, things like that.
I love it. And, even though it's titled "How to Plan Your Business," the way that you approach it, it really is accessible to someone who just wants to think about life, not
Yes.
just their business itself. And so, I would suggest if you're listening and you're like, "Well, I don't have a business. I don't want to start a business." I'd say, download it because I think that there are a lot of things that you can learn from this guide. So, um, all you need to do is go to kelseymurphy.com, and then there's a black button right in the center that says free planner, and you can download it, and it's quite easy. And of course, we will link to your Whiskey and Work podcast as well, so people can check that out. So, Kelsey, thank you so much just for being vulnerable and sharing about your experience. And I'm so excited that you're pregnant again. That's super fun. And McKenna will have, do you know, boy or girl? Are you waiting
It's
to
gonna
find
be
out?
another girl. It's gonna be another girl.
Okay,
Yeah.
super fun.
I
Girls are
know.
great.
I
My
know.
my daughter is 20, and so
Oh,
she's awesome.
oh,
So yeah,
I
yeah,
love
that's
it.
great.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. I love the conversations you're facilitating. I think it's really important work that we're doing out there, and the fact that you're creating this space for these conversations. It's scary to have these conversations, whether it's about miscarriage or it's about anything else that's a trying thing in life that we're trying to figure out how to move through, and we're dealing with our own insecurities and our own confusions. Finding navigating those waters is really tough. So I love the work you're doing. I love that you're opening up that space, and it was an honor to have this conversation and be here. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Kelsey.